What's going on, everybody? It's Warren. Welcome back to the Cosmic Wonder, where we talk all things Marvel and MCU, and we just watched Hawkeye, Episode 4. So needless to say, some spoilers coming for Episode 4. This is going to be my breakdown of the episode, but I actually am going to hit you with some big theories as well. I think I might have discovered who the true villain is, and I think I figured out that they're making us believe that certain people are the villains when they really aren't. And I'm also going to hit you with a theory about who that watch, that Rolex, could belong to. And maybe some of you are thinking it, but maybe some of you aren't. And the answer might surprise you if my theory is correct. So we're going to talk about all of that in this video. And of course, if you love Marvel, be sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the recent MCU news. So a lot happened in Hawkeye Episode 4. There are some key things that we need to talk about. And let's start off by talking about and breaking down Jack and Eleanor. Now, the last episode, we left off on a cliffhanger with Jack holding the Ronin sword to Hawkeye's throat, telling him not to move, and this is exactly where we pick up. Now, Jack thought that Hawkeye was an intruder, but they quickly realized that it's Hawkeye, and even though he calls him Archer, he definitely recognizes who he is, an Avenger. So the two of them sit down with Eleanor and Jack, and Kate comes on pretty strong about the fact that the two of them are working together. Eleanor is surprised, saying that her daughter is helping an Avenger with an Avenger-level threat, in which Hawkeye says not exactly, but ultimately admits that they are working together. Eleanor figured out that Kate used her security clearances to try and locate some information about the Tracksuit Mafia, but ultimately says that she'll have to trust everybody at the table, which is ironic because I'm about to explain why she's the bad guy. But she escorts Hawkeye out alone, and she explains that Kate isn't a superhero. Clint says, "I know, but she's pretty good," in which Eleanor says Natasha Romanoff was pretty dang good at it, wasn't she? And this really hits Clint right in the feels. He gets pretty torn up about this, as you can tell by the expression on his face. And later on, when he talks to Kate about it and has flashbacks of Natasha, we can tell that he's just still really emotional. But Eleanor wants Clint to not put his daughter in danger, and he told her that he can't leave the case alone. But it's very interesting. She asks him to close the file on the case. She says, "So you'll forget this case." And of course, Clint can't do that. He is on a mission. And here's where things get kind of interesting. I've stated from the beginning that I don't really think Jack could be the villain because I think it's too obvious. I think it's too much in our face. And I think here it's starting to get revealed who the true villains are. They introduced Kingpin in the last episode. Not directly, but we did see him and we did find out that there is somebody above Maya. And as soon as Clint leaves the Bishop's apartment, Eleanor gets right on the phone and makes a call. The person doesn't pick up, but she leaves a message saying, "It's Eleanor, could you call me back, please? It's urgent." And she's stuttering this whole time and gasping for air, so she's clearly very concerned. Now, here's exactly what I think is happening here. I think Eleanor is a bad guy. I think she's a villain, and I think she's working either for or with Kingpin. Now, you may be thinking, but didn't they reveal in this episode that Jack was actually kind of involved with the Tracksuit Mafia? And yes, they did reveal that. However, I don't think it's what it seems to be. Now, I actually really like Jack. I think he's a good character, and I think he's actually a good guy. I think he's a good guy who is simply in love. And I think he's just a guy who really likes swords. Now, Hawkeye's wife, Laura, finds out that Jack is the owner of a holding company that launders money for the Tracksuit Mafia, apparently revealing that he works with them. But let's recall what Armand said in the first episode. In the first episode, he was very skeptical of Eleanor. He said that he tried to convince Jack not to marry her. He said Jack thinks he won the lottery, but he wasn't sure about that. Then we saw him arguing with Eleanor, and his words were, "I have powerful friends too," meaning Eleanor was talking about and using as leverage her powerful friends, who I believe is actually Kingpin. I believe that's who she called when she made that call saying that it's urgent, with obviously the urgency being that Clint Barton, an Avenger, is now on their case. Then if you recall, Armand said in the auction that Jack doesn't have any money. He said that he didn't have the 300 grand to pay for the sword, which leads me to believe that Jack isn't exactly as smart as they're trying to make him appear. I think Eleanor is using Jack. In the words of my moderator for the channel, Mr. Anderson, I think he is a patsy. I think he's charming, but I don't think he's smart. And this is actually proven in the scene after he dances with Eleanor. He says, "You know what they say, life is short, you never know what you're gonna get." which is part of an actual saying, but is also part of Forrest Gump's mother talking to him when she says, "Life is like a box of chocolate, you never know what you're gonna get," which is why Eleanor and Kate immediately burst into laughter. And Kate says every time you use one of those aphorisms, they are wrong. And he just has no clue. He says, "No, that can't be right, is it?" But then Eleanor says, "The other day you said absence makes the heart grow older," which is wrong. The actual saying is absence makes the heart grow fonder. And he genuinely doesn't know that these are the wrong sayings, so I'm starting to think that he's just not a very smart guy and he's love-struck, which makes it incredibly easy for Eleanor to use him, which is why I think she actually made the company herself, Sloan Ltd, but registered it under Jack's name without him even knowing. She could have forged the signature herself, or she could have told him that it's for something completely legitimate and he just has no idea, and he loves her, so he trusts her. So I think this is what's actually happening. I think it's a big direction trying to make us believe that Jack is the villain, and this is just classic Marvel. Putting somebody so obviously bad in our face, making us believe that it's the villain, when really, it's not. But I believe Eleanor is working with Kingpin and the Tracksuit Mafia, helping them launder money. I think it's her behind everything. And I could be completely wrong about this, but this is my theory as of now, and I do think something along these lines is actually going to happen. Now, the next part we need to talk about and break down is the watch. The vintage Rolex that Hawkeye and the Tracksuit Mafia are looking for. And this watch is important, so important that Laura even asked Clint about it because she knows about it. If you actually listen to what she says when she speaks in German so her kids can't hear her, she says, "I've been wondering. Anything else go missing from the compound?" And Clint automatically knows what she's talking about. He says, "Do you mean the Rolex?" And she says, "Yes." And Clint gets a little flustered. He says, "I don't think so. Why wasn't that destroyed like years ago?" And Laura seems pretty concerned about this as well. And then she says, "Well, I thought so, but I thought the same thing about your fancy outfit," obviously referring to the Ronin outfit, which was also at the Avengers compound where the watch was. Now, I have 3 ideas of who this watch could belong to, and one of them is it could belong to Laura. Clint ends the conversation by saying it's worth looking into and says if you can, check the signal from the transmitter. Clearly, Hawkeye and his wife Laura know all about this watch. They even know and have the means to track its signal. And Laura is showing in the scene that she's not all what she appears to be. She knows more than one language, and she's proven that she can track a lot of stuff down, whether that's information, items, and probably people. So I have a theory that could be pretty far-fetched, but hear me out here. Clint tells Kate the Rolex belongs to somebody that he used to work with, and he says that they've been out of the game for a long time, but their identity is still attached to that watch, and if the tracksuits find out about it, it would blow their cover, goodbye friend. Now, Clint doesn't really have too many friends, so here's my theory. The watch is actually Laura's. He is talking about his wife, and I think that his wife could have actually been a spy for another government. Now, originally I thought that maybe she was a Black Widow, and when he pulled out Natasha and flipped her instead of killing her, perhaps he did the same thing with his wife. But as some people pointed out in my stream, she's had kids, so she can't be a Black Widow, unless they have adopted their kids, which is entirely possible. So perhaps Laura was a Black Widow before. She fell in love with Hawkeye as he saved her life instead of killing her, along with Natasha, and eventually they went on to adopt some kids. And if she was a Black Widow, then she would have definitely known Natasha as well and probably worked together, and they were probably really close, which is why their kids say Aunt Nat. Because just like Yelena and Natasha were sisters, Laura could be a somewhat sister to Natasha as well, a Black Widow sister. Now, even if she's not a Black Widow, she could have worked with Natasha and the Black Widow program in some way, shape, or form, and still could have been pulled out by Clint. This would explain the closeness between Natasha and Laura, because a lot of people have always thought that it's kind of weird because it kind of seems like Natasha and Clint really like each other, but perhaps all 3 of them just share this bond because Clint was supposed to kill both of them and didn't, but instead gave them a way out. But if this is true, then Laura definitely had an identity. And just like Natasha's identity and everything she did was exposed during Captain America the Winter Soldier, perhaps Laura is at risk of that as well, which is why she and Clint are both very concerned with the watch and it not getting into the wrong hands and revealing the identity of Clint's so-called friend, which I believe is actually her. Because I don't think Hawkeye would tell Kate that it's her, because that would open up a whole can of worms and Kate would want to know the whole thing, and I don't think Hawkeye wants to say, yeah, it's my wife, she used to be a spy or an assassin, and I'm sure Hawkeye just doesn't want to get into all of that. So I'm thinking that Laura showed some pretty good skills in this episode, and she showed a lot of concern about the watch, and so did Clint. So it could belong to her because she could have a past, whether that's being a Black Widow or spy or something else, they don't want it to get out. Now the other option is it could literally be a friend of Clint's. Now I don't think it's an Avenger because he would have just said the Avenger's name, plus all the identities of the Avengers are out there. Everyone knows Tony Stark, Steve Rogers, Natasha, Bruce Banner. These are public figures. People even know Thor, who doesn't even live on the planet. So I don't think the watch belonged to an Avenger because none of the Avengers' identities are being kept secret. So that leads me to believe that if it's not his wife, his friend could be somebody that we've never seen before in the MCU. It could perhaps be Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, and the watch could prove that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, which is why it needs to not fall into the hands of the wrong people. And perhaps Clint knows Matt because maybe he helped him out with some legal stuff. After all, after Captain America Civil War, they told us that Clint and Scott took plea deals, which means that someone came in and intervened for them, most likely. Everyone's entitled to a lawyer, so perhaps that lawyer could have been Matt Murdock. Since Matt Murdock is rumored to be in the Echo series, it would make sense if he came into this series. Not to mention, Kingpin and Echo are directly related to Daredevil. So it could be Matt's, and his Daredevil identity could be at risk here if somebody finds that watch. And if Kingpin is behind the Tracksuit Mafia, which we all believe he is, it would make sense if he believes that watch belongs to Daredevil and could prove that Matt is him, or believes it belongs to Matt and could prove that he's Daredevil. And my last option would be Kingpin, but Hawkeye says it belongs to a friend, so I don't believe it could be Kingpin. I know a lot of people think it could be, which is why the Tracksuit Mafia is trying to get it, but I really doubt it's Kingpin's watch. So my two best guesses are it's Matt Murdock's, or Clint's wife has somewhat of a past and could belong to her. Now, Clint actually went through a lot emotionally in this episode. He revealed to Kate that he is indeed Ronin, and he did a lot of things as Ronin. Of course, he did this because his entire family got dusted in the snap. And he kind of starts to relive some things. We see the beginning opening footage for Avengers Endgame, where Clint is on his property and he's teaching his daughter Lila how to shoot a bow. Laura is making lunch, and then of course they all got snapped. And in his head, he hears Natasha in the background saying, killing all of those people isn't going to bring your family back, which is what she tells him during Avengers Endgame. We then see new footage of him as Ronin as he relives some parts of his past as Ronin inside of his head. We see him killing a few people, which is obviously haunting him. Then of course we see the part of Avengers Endgame where Natasha sacrifices herself so Clint can get the Soul Stone, which obviously has been haunting him as well. Now Clint the next day sends Kate on a mission to go see the LARPers. The reason is because the police station has most of his trick arrows. He needs them back, and most of the LARPers that he fought around during the event, including Grills, are NYPD and firefighters. So he needs Kate to get the officers to go to the precinct and get the arrows. So that's her task, and his task is to go and talk to Kazi. One of the biggest things that concerns Hawkeye right now is that Kate is in danger because Maya thinks that she's Ronin. So she's in danger, and even if Kate wasn't in danger, Clint can't have everybody thinking that the Ronin is still around, because that's bad news for him. So he goes to Kazi and essentially tells him, hey, convince Maya that Ronin is gone. He's dead. And if you recall in the last episode, he actually said that Natasha, Black Widow, killed the Ronin. Now Maya didn't believe him, and she actually attacked Kate, in which Kazi thought was a little overboard, which is why Clint is going to Kazi. He says that you're reasonably not stupid person, and he has Maya's ear. So he tells him to get the job done. Convince Maya that Ronin is gone and she's chasing a ghost. Then Hawkeye and Kate attempt to break into an apartment where they have tracked the location of the ROLEX. Hawkeye has a smart, thought-out plan, but of course Kate kind of goes off the bandwagon and does things her own way. This puts her inside of the apartment while Clint is on the lookout. Kate ends up getting into the apartment where she immediately sees some lights that are flashing like strobe lights. Now she covers them quickly with putty arrows and eventually goes on to find the watch. And after she finds the watch, she finds a piece of paper that has information about Clint's family, including the name of his wife and all of their kids. So somebody is tracking down Hawkeye and learning about his family, and we quickly discover that that person is Maya. Clint quickly realizes that those flashing strobe lights were sensors for deaf people. The alarms flash for deaf people since they obviously cannot hear an alarm. Now here's where things get really good. Clint thinks that he's fighting Maya on the rooftop, and of course Maya comes into the apartment and hits Kate, which confuses her because she says she's fighting Maya, but Clint also says that he is fighting Maya, but Kate says no, she's here in the apartment, and Clint goes, well, who the hell am I fighting? A mysterious figure emerges out of nowhere and fights Clint, and the second we see a Black Widow bite come off of her wrist, we know exactly who it is. It is Yelena Belova. If you've seen the Black Widow movie, you know exactly who this is. If you haven't seen the movie, it's Natasha Romanoff's sister. And in the post-credit scene of Black Widow, spoilers incoming, we see Yelena at Natasha's grave when Val all of a sudden comes up to her. Now we saw Val in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. She recruited U.S. agent John Walker for a team that hasn't really been revealed yet, but we believe to be the Thunderbolts or the Dark Avengers. And in the post-credit scene, it was very obvious that she recruited Yelena Belova to work for her. And in the scene, she delivers Yelena's next assignment, and she says that her next assignment is to go after the person that killed her sister, Natasha, and then she showed her a picture of Hawkeye. So Val told Yelena that Clint actually killed Natasha. Now obviously this is a lie, but Yelena doesn't know anything else, so she kind of just trusts her employer. So this is why Yelena shows up out of nowhere and attacks Clint. Now meanwhile, Maya and Kate are still fighting, but all of them end up on the same rooftop together in some scenes that are pretty freaking awesome. All of a sudden, we kind of see everyone fighting. Maya, Yelena, Clint, and Kate, and it's an epic scene until eventually Kate shows up, hits everybody with a sonic arrow, in which Maya kicks her clear across the rooftop, but then Kate shoots her in the shoulder with an arrow. This causes Maya to retreat, and Clint is left to deal with Yelena, in which he does take her mask off, and it is officially revealed to be Yelena Belova. Now, it looks like she probably could have taken out Clint. She hits him with a widow bite and he kind of goes down, but then Kate is looking at her with a bow pulled back, ready to fire an arrow at her. Now, Yelena kind of shakes her head no, and Kate does put the arrow down. This causes Yelena to make an escape. However, I do believe that Yelena could have taken both of them. So it leads me to believe that Yelena actually saw Clint taking care of Kate and believes that maybe he's not such a bad person and could make her question things. Now, this is where things get really intense. Hawkeye recognizes that that was a Black Widow, and maybe he does even know who Yelena Belova is. I wouldn't be surprised considering how close him and Nat were. And I would assume Yelena knows who Hawkeye is because one, he was an Avenger and he fought beside Natasha, and probably knew they were at least somewhat friends, and that's enough to put a little bit of doubt in her mind about whether or not Hawkeye actually did kill her. But the fact that a Black Widow showed up makes Hawkeye realize how serious this situation is now. A Black Widow assassin is now involved in the picture, and he knows because of his experience with them and Natasha that they are some of the deadliest killers on the planet, and this severely puts Kate in jeopardy. Hawkeye knew that he could deal with the Tracksuit Mafia and keep Kate safe, but he doesn't know if he can against a Black Widow, and this is why he starts to push her away. He does this because he actually cares for her and doesn't want her to get hurt. He says, "You're not my partner, you never were," and he says, "I'm not gonna do it." And what he means here is, I'm not going to partner with you, I'm not going to risk your life, I'm not going to have you die. He can't go through the trauma again of losing somebody like Natasha. Now, of course, Kate doesn't mean as much to him as Natasha. He knew her forever and they were best friends. But of course, he is starting to really care for Kate, and he can't lose her because one, she's just a kid, and two, he really is starting to care for her. So he takes her bow and he tells her to go home. And that is Hawkeye episode 4. Please let me know what you thought about this episode in the comments down below. What do you rate it from 1 to 10? And let me know what you think about some of my theories. Do you think one of them could be right, or do you have a theory of your own? Be sure to put that in the comments down below as well. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you can stay up to date on the MCU and so you can watch the future breakdowns. And for live updates, you can always follow me on Instagram or Twitter. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.